One man, 78 followers, kitchen knives and cooking spits. In under a year, he defeated 2 Roman armies and made his base camp on an active volcano. Not a metaphor. An actual volcano. And Rome, the most lethal military machine the ancient world had ever produced, had absolutely no idea what to do about him. Here's the paradox that should bother you. Rome owned this man. Legally, completely. He was property, and he made Rome look incompetent so many times that eventually the richest man in the entire republic had to personally drop his business empire, fund a private army, and go deal with it himself. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly why. Spartacus was not some random prisoner unlucky enough to end up in chains. He was Thracian, from roughly modern Bulgaria, and almost certainly a former auxiliary soldier in the Roman army itself. He knew Roman tactics. He probably fought alongside Roman legions. Then something went wrong, and he ended up enslaved and shipped to a gladiator school in Capua. The Ludus Gladiator School was a cage with training equipment. You ate, slept, and bled inside its walls. You fought when they told you. You died when the crowd decided. The Romans who ran these places weren't monsters by their own standards. They were businessmen protecting investments. You were kept just healthy enough to perform. You were a product with legs for a man who had commanded soldiers, who understood strategy, who had once been a free warrior. This wasn't just humiliation. It was a slow erasure. Escape wasn't ambition for Spartacus. It was arithmetic. Stay, and the arena eventually kills you. Run, and maybe you live. The math wasn't complicated, so in 73 BC, he convinced 77 others to do the math with him. So 78 men escaped with kitchen knives and cooking spits. Cute, right? They headed for Mount Vesuvius, and before you picture dramatic foreshadowing, this wasn't about symbolism. It was about to rain. Vesuvius in 73 BC was dormant, heavily forested, and its steep volcanic slopes were essentially a natural fortress. One narrow path up. Everything else, sheer cliff. Rome sent Gaius Claudius Glaber with 3,000 militia troops, not even real legionaries, basically a police force, and his plan was elegant in its laziness. Block the one path up the mountain. Wait. Starve them out. The escaped slaves would surrender, get crucified. Done. Glaber set up camp at the base and presumably felt very good about his career prospects. What happened next is one of the great military gut punches in ancient history. Spartacus's men stripped wild vines from the forest, wove them into ropes, and rappelled down the sheer cliff face. At night, silently, they circled completely around the mountain, came up behind the Roman camp, and hit it from the one direction Glaber had decided was literally impossible. The camp was annihilated. A second Roman force showed up, Publius Varinius, with more troops and more confidence. Same result, different humiliation. Spartacus captured Varinius's actual horse, his lictors, the official bodyguards of a Roman commander. His personal fasces, the symbol of Roman authority. He didn't just beat the man, he took his props. 2 armies, 2 defeats, 1 volcano. Rome was starting to sweat. Word spreads across the countryside. And here's where things get genuinely terrifying for Rome. People start showing up, thousands of them, because Spartacus had accidentally advertised something Rome couldn't allow anyone to believe, that slaves could win. In months, not years, months, the rebellion explodes from 78 people to over 70,000 escaped slaves, obviously, but also rural poor, army deserters, and farmers who'd lost everything to Rome's own economic brutality. Conquest had flooded the peninsula with cheap slave labor, gutting the livelihoods of ordinary free people who couldn't compete. Spartacus wasn't just running a slave revolt. He was accidentally leading a class uprising. That distinction terrified Roman aristocrats far more than the escaped gladiators did, and somehow Spartacus organized this chaos. He divided 70,000 desperate, traumatized, heavily armed people into actual military units. He established training rotations, set up systematic raiding operations, and fed the army from captured Roman supply lines. His men were eventually fighting with Roman weapons, in Roman formations, against Roman soldiers. Think about that for a second. So, if Spartacus had 70,000 people, why didn't he just march on Rome and end it? The answer reveals the single biggest internal conflict of the entire war. Spartacus wanted to go home. His actual plan was to move the entire force north, cross the Alps, and let everyone scatter back to their own territories. Get out. Survive. His co-commanders, a Gaul named Crixus and another named Oenomaus, thought that was insane when they were winning. Why leave? Italy was right there. Roman villas were right there, full of things. This wasn't a philosophical debate. It was a fracture. And eventually it became a split that would cost 30,000 lives. Crixus took roughly 30,000 people south to keep raiding while Spartacus moved north. Rome saw the gap immediately. A praetor named Quintus Arrius intercepted Crixus near Mount Garganus and destroyed his force. Crixus was killed. 30,000 people gone because they went in the wrong direction at the wrong time. Spartacus turned back south in revenge and beat 2 more Roman armies. 4 Roman forces defeated in total. But here's the detail that doesn't make it into most textbooks. After he won, he gathered Roman prisoners of war and made them fight each other as gladiators. At Crixus's funeral, he made Romans experience what Rome had made him. That's not just grief. That's a statement. Spartacus has now beaten 4 Roman armies. The Senate is in full panic. So they turn to the one man in Rome with both the money and the monstrous personal ambition to fix this. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, which in the 1st century BC meant possibly the wealthiest private individual on earth. His fortune included a charming business model. When a building caught fire, Crassus would show up with a private fire brigade, wait while the building burned, buy it from the panicking owner for almost nothing, then put the fire out. He owned entire city blocks this way. Crassus understood leverage, and his solution to the Spartacus problem was absolutely unhinged. He needed Spartacus destroyed not just for Rome, but for himself. Pompey was Rome's greatest general. Caesar was rising fast. Crassus had money, but money without military glory meant second place in Roman politics. He privately funded an army of 40,000, took personal command, and marched south. He was not in a charitable mood. His first move tells you everything about Crassus. When some of his soldiers broke and ran from a skirmish, he had 1 in every 10 of them executed. Decimation. An ancient punishment Rome hadn't formally used in generations. Around 500 soldiers killed by their own colleagues on his orders. The message to the other 39,500 was simple. I am more dangerous than Spartacus. Now, move. Crassus's plan was to build a wall. Not around Rome, across the entire toe of Italy. 37 miles of trench and fortification, cutting Spartacus off from the north entirely. And Spartacus, in the middle of a brutal winter, had to decide, try the impossible, or die slowly inside the shrinking perimeter. Spartacus's answer was Sicily. Cross the strait, take the island, use it as a base. Sicily had its own history of slave revolts, and the population might be sympathetic. He cut a deal with Cilician pirates to ferry his army across. The pirates took his money, looked at the strait, decided this was someone else's problem, and sailed away. You can't really blame them. He tried to build rafts from timber and barrels. The currents through the Strait of Messina are vicious, rotating, unpredictable, strong enough to destroy improvised vessels in minutes. It didn't work. And while Spartacus was staring at the water, 3 Roman forces were closing in. Pompey from the north. Lucullus arriving by sea from the east. Crassus's wall behind him. No exits. Then, one night, in a blizzard, 12,000 of his men filled sections of Crassus's trench with timber, dirt and dead horses, and punched through the wall. One section, one night. It worked. Spartacus was out. But with Pompey days away and his army fracturing under weeks of desperation, he made his final decision. He turned back south to fight. Here's what the history books don't emphasize about the final battle in 71 BC. Before it started, Spartacus killed his own horse. Deliberately. In front of his men. If he won, he said, he'd have all of Rome's horses. If he lost, he wouldn't need one. He cut off his own escape route. He was not planning to survive this. He was planning to win it, or end it. Ancient sources record he fought his way through the battle, trying to reach Crassus personally. He killed 2 Roman officers who stood between them. He came close enough that Crassus's bodyguards had to actively engage. Then he was surrounded, wounded in the thigh. He went to one knee and kept fighting until he couldn't. He fell, and his body was never found. Rome couldn't display his corpse, couldn't parade it, couldn't give the crowds the closure they needed. The man they had owned as property denied them even that. Crassus's response was 6,000 crucifixions along the Appian Way. Every surviving rebel mounted on crosses for 130 miles from Capua to Rome. That's not a military measure, that's a message born out of something that looks a lot like fear. Rome, the most powerful military force on earth, needed its richest man, 2 of its greatest generals, 4 full years and 4 defeated armies before it could stop one man who started with a kitchen knife stolen from a cafeteria. The entire apparatus of the Republic mobilized against a single escaped slave, and it was close. Multiple times, it was genuinely close. Crassus got his victory. He got his triumph. He got the political capital he'd spent his fortune to purchase. 3 years later, Caesar and Pompey had outmaneuvered him completely, and he died in a disastrous war in Parthia that he'd started specifically to outshine them. His head was reportedly used as a prop in a Greek play. History is rarely subtle. Spartacus got a myth, still told 2,100 years later, still argued about, still worth an entire video. Crassus bought his victory and it rotted in his hands inside a decade. The man he crushed became permanent. So honestly, who won?